Okay, so we're going to get started. Today, actually, the lecture portion is really short, and the demo portion will be a lot longer. So there's not too much for me to go through in lecture format, because really the best thing to do when I'm explaining blending modes is for you guys to do it while I do it. So you can see what happens and what changes and kind of the direction we're going. Blending modes are something that is very powerful, that's built into Photoshop, and it's not something that's that common for people to teach you initially. And so you work with the tools that you have. And I think that it's one of those tools that once you understand what it does, it suddenly opens a whole new door for what you can do. So I really want to emphasize it, and I've been doing that over the last couple of classes, or the last couple of years of teaching, and I think it's something that's a really powerful tool for you guys to use. So what are blending modes fundamentally? Essentially, a blending mode is kind of like if you imagine two sheets of trace paper. Let's say you're drawing, right? And you draw something on your desk, and then you put a piece of yellow trace over it. Well, your drawing has a yellow cast to it, right? So the tracing paper itself made your drawing look kind of yellow. Let's say your first sheet was white. If you, instead of putting a yellow sheet on, if you took out a white sheet and put it over, your drawing would look different. If you took out a red sheet and put that over, it would look different. Blending modes are kind of the same thing. So they have to do with opacity. They have to do with how one layer transforms or changes the layer below it. And the key here is that there are different mathematical examples that control how that opacity or how that color shift is happening. It's kind of like picking the red paper or the green paper or the yellow paper or whatever you're using. The difference here is that we're not picking colors. We're actually picking how the color of the, or not necessarily the color, but the black value or the gray value of the layer that's on top affects the layer that's on the bottom, in terms of what's transparent and what's darker. So I'll show you some of these kind of live as we go through. There are different groups of blending modes, and unfortunately the names that are in these groups are really not self-explanatory. But generally the things to keep in mind are we have a group here that's all about darkening the image. So the most common here is multiply. That's what we'll use today. It's that one right there. That's generally about darkening the image. We want to make things a little bit darker. The next grouping here is about lightening the image. So everything that's in that group right here is about lightening the image. We're going to use screen as our primary one. So the first one is multiply. Second one is screen. The last one is in the contrast section. So it's this section right here. And we're going to be using the overlay mode primarily. Later on in the semester, we'll use the soft light as well. But for today's purposes, we're going to stick to just those three major ones: multiply, screen, and overlay. There's a few other ones. There's luminosity. We'll touch on that today. There's a few other kind of specialty ones. But for the most part, those are the ones that we're going to be working with. So there they are, isolated there as well. You can see them. So let's try to do an illustration here of what's happening. So I've got two layers, and I've put these in kind of three dimensions so you can see which layer is on top of the other. The first layer, layer 1 here, is a gradient at the bottom, and then a black square, a medium 50% gray square, and a white square. And that layer is over the top of an all blue layer. So the bottom layer is all blue. So we're looking at how does this black, gray, and white affect the blue layer depending on what blending mode we're choosing as we go through. So when I look at them together, there's the top layer. Okay, when I look at them together, this is what I'm seeing on the screen. But of course, because they're different layers, I could turn off the black square, the gray, the gray, black, white squares. I could turn those off and just see the blue, or I could turn the blue off and just see the squares. But what we're looking at is how they apply when we apply a blending mode to them. So we're going to pay a lot of attention in multiply to what happens to the dark square and what happens to the light square. So this is the first blending mode. And remember, I talked about this being about darkening the image overall. The function here is darkening. So what's going to happen is the areas that are lighter in the multiply layer, so remember the topmost layer is the one that has the multiply applied to it. The things that are lighter than the background color are going to become transparent or semi-transparent. So here, the white is going to go away. It's going to become transparent. Completely transparent. The gray is going to become kind of 50% transparent, and the black is going to become darker. The blue is going to become darker. So let's see how that actually happens here. So once I apply the blending mode to it, you see that the white goes away completely. It becomes transparent. The medium makes it a little bit darker, the blue a little bit darker, and the black makes the blue a lot darker. So if we switch blending modes to the next one, we're going to do screen. Remember, this was about lightening the image overall. So when we do this one, what's going to happen is the black, and actually I made a mistake on this slide and even on the one that you'll see on when you do the sample today, that black isn't truly black. It's about 90% gray. So it's not quite going to become completely transparent. The middle is going to become, the blue is going to become a little bit lighter for that 50% gray, and then the white is going to become, well, it's going to stay basically white. So it's going to become really light. So remember, this is about lightening the overall image. So when the effect is applied, there we go. So the black is becoming transparent, or almost transparent in this case. The light is becoming, the blue is becoming lighter, and then ultimately it's becoming white. So this is about how that top layer is applied to the bottom layer. Last one, overlay, and then we'll do the demo all together, which will make a lot more sense. But I like to talk through it at least a little bit first. So on this last one, this is going to be the overlay layer. So we're paying attention to all three of the squares. So in this case, the darks are going to become dark, the lights are going to become light, and the middle is what is going to be transparent. So if you, well, I'll show you the example. There we go. So the middle becomes transparent. The dark becomes darker, the light becomes lighter, and the middle stays transparent. So if you remember back to last class, we did that dodging and burning. And remember, I had you go in, when you were creating it, you said layer, new layer, and then you said, I want the mode to be overlay, and I want to fill with a neutral 50% gray. You check that box. So what we were doing, let me go back for a second here, is we were filling the layer with this, that neutral gray, which becomes transparent. So it wasn't affecting the image at all. And then when we did the dodging and burning on that layer, we added some black, some dark to make things darker. We added some white to make things lighter. So we were using this blending mode last class, and you didn't even know it. So it's a perfect example of how this stuff kind of weaves its way in. So that's it for the actual formal slides. What I want you to all do is I want you to log in, if you're not already logged in, and I want you to go to today's exercise 105. And right up there at the beginning, there's a sample file. It's called ps-blendingmodes.psd. I want you to download that file from the website while I switch over, and then have that file up, and we'll talk through what's happening with those various blending modes. Use your Insight. Whatever your school login, you have an Adobe account through the school. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So I pulled up exercise 105 right here. And this, under part 1, download the sample file ps.blendingmodes.psd. That's the file that I want. And so I'll click on it, and it will download here. And then I can go ahead and click on that ps.blendingmodes.psd. And it'll open up in your Photoshop. Okay, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to walk around and make sure everybody has it, because this is one of those times where I want to do everybody together as we walk through it, and then you'll turn loose to do your actual work. So bear with me for a second. I want to make sure everybody has it up. Okay, so we're going to keep going. I'm going to work through the sample file with you guys. This is the part 1, just so that you understand what's going on. Then we'll actually go through and apply it to photos so you can see how it impacts photos, etc. So first off, in this sample file, I want to explain to you what we're seeing in terms of our layers. So I have the background layer, which is that blue color, exactly what I showed in lecture. And above it, I have this layer 1, which is, if I turn off the background, we can see that it's just the gray, dark gray, light gray, and white, and then the gradient across the bottom. I have 2 other layers, layer 2 and layer 3. Those are little kind of drawing layers. I'm going to show you how those apply in just a little bit. We'll leave those off for right now, and we will turn back on the blue background layer. So really, applying blending modes is relatively easy. All we need is the layer itself that we want to have the blending mode applied to, and then the blending mode is going to be listed up here in our layers palette, and that it currently says normal because it's just a basic layer. When we click on normal, we see that list of what I was talking about. So these are the darkenings, these are the lightenings, these are the kind of mid-range stays transparent, dark and lighten at the same time. The nice thing about Photoshop is it gives us a little preview. We don't even have to fully select it to see it. As we scroll through, we can see what's happening. So in the case of our purposes here, we're going to use multiply as our first example. So if I click on multiply, you see that the white becomes transparent, exactly like I was doing in lecture. The blue here becomes darker blue. So the gray is applying to the blue, it's becoming darker, and the black is applying to the blue and becoming a really dark blue. So it's really about darkening the image overall. If we switch from multiply, instead of multiply, if we come down to our next mode and we go into screen mode, in that mode, we've got the white basically becoming, or the white making the blue white. In this case, the medium gray is making the blue a much lighter blue. And then the dark here is becoming relatively transparent. Like I said, it's about 90% gray instead of full black. Someday I need to fix that so it's full black. But you guys get the idea of what's happening. So in this case, the black is becoming transparent, and overall the image is getting lighter. And then if we switch from our screen mode down into our overlay mode, we're seeing that the mid-range is the part that's becoming transparent, and the dark area is becoming a much darker blue, and the light area is becoming a much lighter blue. So we've worked through those three basic ones: multiply, screen, and overlay. Now, how do those apply in a kind of a practical sense? We're going to go through today and we'll talk about how it applies to photos and post-processing of photos. But I want to show you something else that we're going to use later on that I think is the undersung hero of what the Adobe products can do with blending modes that people forget about. And so you guys have probably attempted this before. You're working on a portfolio or you're working on a poster and you have something that has a white background and you need to get rid of the background. And so by default, most people just try to select the background and delete it, which is what is common. If it's in fact a white background, you don't really have to delete it. You just have to change the blending mode for how it's applied. So we're going to go ahead and turn on layer 2, which is a black and white drawing. Okay, so I have black lines on a white background. This actually, I think this came out of SketchUp, but it could be out of any program, right? I have a black and white drawing here. I'd like for that white to become transparent so I could put it on some kind of a backdrop, whatever it is. In this case, it's going to be a blue backdrop, but you get the idea here. So what I can do is just change the blending mode. So the lines are going to stay black. I'm just changing so that the white becomes transparent. So I'll go ahead and select layer 2, and I'll change my blending mode here to multiply. Actually, I need to turn off layer 1 there. And when I do that, I know it's hard to see on the screen, but essentially all of my white turns transparent, and my lines stayed that nice black. So it's a way of quickly adding transparency to something that has a white background, and it's really easy to do. If I used one of the other ones, like the screen mode, for example, right, in this case, it's actually showing where the lines are, what's in the background. So it's showing the blue from the background through where the lines would be, and keeping the white foreground color. And then in the case of the overlay mode, there's not really anything that's happening here. It's not helping me out. I also have the inverse. I have the white lines on the black background here. And so in this case, the natural choice would be screen mode, because screen would make the black transparent. And so when that happens, we're seeing the nice white. So this is kind of like the old school blueprint look. So we have screen mode. In this case, multiply mode doesn't really do much. It just gives us a black background. And again, the overlay mode doesn't do much. So I just wanted to point those out because it's something we'll use later on in the semester during a lot of your collage work in Photoshop. So it's an important skill to recognize and keep in the back of your mind. But for today's purposes, it's not that relevant. So those were my demo stuff. That's part 1. We all did that together. The next part, under part 2, we're going to play around with photos and how you might be able to enhance photos. So instead of picking one of your photos that you went out and took, in this case, these work better with older faded photos. And typically, if you're taking photos with your iPhone, they're not going to be old and faded. So we're going to go find some old and faded pictures online. So I'm going to use the Creative Commons search. It's search.creativecommons.org. Actually, it looks like it's now ccsearch.creativecommons.org. And this just lets you find Creative Commons licensed images. And so I'm going to type in like old photograph or something like that. And I'll scroll through here, and what I'm looking for is something that's not, something that's kind of faded. So something like this that's kind of faded, okay, that's probably a good one to play around with. And so theoretically, I should be able to download this somewhere. Let me just go ahead and save image as, maybe. Told you, today's not my day. Technology's not liking me.
Yeah, I think we broke the website.
Oh,
we can not loading for us.
Oh.
Error. Yeah, the error.
Classic. So the alternative would be to Google image search. I think if you broke Google, I'd be impressed. Let's put it that way. But if you're doing a Google image search here, and you say old photograph, these aren't necessarily Creative Commons licensed images, but you can go into, I think it's under your tools here. If you click on this tools button, you could go to usage rights, and this is where you can choose something labeled for reuse with modification. That's what you're doing. You're reusing it with modification, and that way you're actually allowed to play around with this. So we can look through here, and again, I'm looking for something that's faded such that we might be able to see or correct some of what's wrong with it. And one of the reasons that I don't pick pictures ahead of time, so obviously I could sit up here and just, I'm going to open these pictures, is I want you guys to see that typically when you're trying to find an image to work with or you're trying to find something to collage with, it takes a while to go through and find the image that actually would be worth spending your time on. I liked my first image. Okay, we'll use that one. So let me go ahead. Watch, I'm going to have an account. This is the way my day is going, right? Or it's not going to load, one or the other.
So what's the difference from actually downloading it from the website versus just pulling it off of the Google?
Generally, you get a higher quality image when you go to the website.
Oh, okay.
But there we go. So I can get the original size. No, I don't want to. See, I told you it was going to be this way. No, I'm not paying for that image. Go back and see if I can get this one again. No, it's not going to like me, is it? I can't win today. At least you guys know that I struggle sometimes too, right? There we go. Ha! I got an image. Excellent. There it is. So I'm going to go ahead and open this image up in Photoshop. So I'll right-click on the image and say Open With, maybe. Photoshop. And there we go. There's my old and faded image. And I want to try to enhance. I want to work with this image a little bit. So we're going to go through and we're going to play around with what multiply will do to an image, what screen mode will do to an image, and what overlay mode will do to the image. The steps that we're going to are very similar. I'm asking that when you start to save your images, if you pick an image, you have the original image and then you have the modified version. So as you go to post it later on. If you want to use the same image for part 2, 3, and 4, that's fine. In that case, you'll have one original image and 3 separate processed images. If you pick different images for parts 2, 3, and 4, you'll have 6 images rather than 4 images. Right? So original plus the modifications. So let's go through the modifications. What we're going to do, and we actually have 2 different strategies for how we apply the blending modes to a layer. The first one would be to go ahead and add a levels adjustment layer, which we did last class. So that would be go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and we're going to do Levels Adjustment. So Layer, New Layer, Levels. There it is. or excuse me, new adjustment layer, levels. And we'll go ahead and do the levels adjustment. So I can darken it up and I can lighten it up. That by itself certainly helped the image. But on top of that, I'm going to change the adjustment from, or the blending mode from being normal to being multiply. And so you can see we went from this faded image to one that has a lot of rich black to it. We really punched out the black and gave it a lot of kind of extra context. Now in this case, this image isn't going to benefit too much from a screen mode, so it might be better to pick a different image and see what happens there. I'm going to go ahead and open up another image. I have some examples that I think will show this a little bit better. If my computer will work and let me open another image. I told you, it's not my day today. Nope, can't open it. That's real nice. All right, so I guess we're going to apply, oh, you know what, maybe I can get it off my flash drive and open it that way. Okay, so I picked up another image here, and so with this image I'm going to do a similar modification, only this time I'm going to use the screen mode for it. So once again I'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels, and then I'll go ahead and pull these in, which is already helping. And so in the screen mode I'm going to switch the adjustment to screen here. And so in this case, when we look at what's it really enhancing, it's not helping the sky, certainly, and it's not helping the mountains in there. But if we looked here in the trees, zoom in here just a little bit more, right there in the trees, we could see a lot more detail once we brighten that up. And so it helps in that context. So in this example, it's helping in that area, but really detrimental in the sky. Alternatively, if I went into multiply, we'd get really good results from the sky, but this becomes almost a completely dark, black blob. So that's not really ideal either. And that's where the third mode comes into place, which is the overlay mode. So we're getting a little bit of lightening and a little bit of darkening both together. And so this is, again, always about, the eye of the beholder, what looks good to you. And it doesn't mean you have to apply them all. Like in this particular image, I don't think screen helps at all. I think multiply really helps the image, and I'm betting that overlay really doesn't help either. So really, in this context, multiply is the best for this particular image. Now remember, this is an exercise, so it's about playing around with it, understanding how to do it, and even if the end result doesn't look as good as you might want it to, that's okay. We're just trying to go through and learn the various techniques. So I've done that for multiply, I've done that for screen, and I've done that for overlay, and I would save each of those images along the way. So I'd have an original, and then I'd have the modified version for overlay. I'd have the original, I'd have the modified version for screen. I'd have the original, and I'd have the modified version for multiply. The next one that we're going to do is called Luminosity. It's under Part 5. And this one's one of those ones that's a little bit different. What we want here is we want an image that's dominated with reds and blues. So like sunset images or things that are highly saturated. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Let me go ahead and open up a file here. I'll go to File and then, oh no, that's right, I can't go to Open. Working with this stuff sometimes is just killing me here. So I'm going to pull up a sunset image as an example. And so what I'm going to do here is a little bit different. So previously I always went to the levels adjustment and I started with that and then applied my blending mode to the levels adjustment. This time we're going to do a curves adjustment. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and it's going to be Curves. And then right here from curves, I'm going to do that traditional S-curve that I was talking about last class, where I peg the center, and then I pull this up slightly, and I pull that down slightly like that. So that by itself helped the image a bit. But I can take it a step further. I can take that adjustment layer, and I can change and provide something called luminosity. And this is one where you really have to see it on the screen to see what it does, but it really enhances the color quite a lot. So I'm going to encourage you to play around with this and see what that does on your own screen, because you'll see it a lot better. Let me open another one and see if I can demo it again for you. Oh, that's right, I can't open things. No, I don't want it open in Paint. All right, here's another image here. So same thing, I'm going to go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and this one's going to be Curves. I'll set up my standard S-curve, so I'll peg the center, pull the top up a bit, pull the bottom down just a bit. Here we go. And then I will apply the luminosity blending mode to it. And then you can toggle it on and toggle it off and see the difference. I don't know how much you guys can really see. Yeah, you guys can't see it very well on the screen. This is one of those things, that's why you have to do it, because you'll be able to see it a lot better when you're doing it on your screen. Okay, so that's luminosity. All right. The next one under part 6 is putting in some kind of a grunge background. And this is something that you'll find can really add depth and texture to your images, and also can add depth and textures to renderings, because especially in the world of renderings, you create a part and you do a rendering of that part and you put it in a scene and you want it to look realistic. Well, things are always slightly dirty. Like, they're never perfectly pristine. I mean, I guess when you first take them out of the package for the first time, they're perfect. But then from then on, they have a little bit of dust on them. They always do. And so I think the best analogy for this is, you guys are all familiar with like the Toy Story movies, the Pixar movies, right? Okay, so there's a whole department within Pixar whose only job it is to add dirt to everything. That's it. They add dirt. They make it look dirty so that it feels more realistic. And it takes that whole department, and that's part of why you go and you see, you know, Toy Story 4 or whatever, and you're like, wow, that animation is really good. It's because somebody spent time putting dirt on things. And it sounds silly, but that's how real life is. Things are always slightly dirty. And so you have to add that layer of dirt. It adds a layer of realism. So in the world of photographs, I'm just going to play around with this particular photo again here. We can do the same thing. We can add that little bit of dirt or a little bit of background texture to any one of these images. So what I'll do is I'll search for something called a grunge texture. It might be easier to do it in Google. So I'll type in grunge texture. And when we pull up grunge textures here, you can see that they really vary. Some of them are really intense. Some of them have scratches to them. Some of them are lighter. Some of them have darker edges. Some of them mimic paper. Some of them mimic concrete. There's a bunch here that you can kind of go through. Any one of these is perfectly fine for you to pick. Once you pick one, and actually I should switch this so it's licensed for reuse. So let me go into my tools and then my usage rights, and let's say it's labeled for reuse with modification. There we go. That means I know I have rights to actually work with this here. This one's going to be a one that you can really see what happens. It's not going to look the best, but it'll help me illustrate the point. So I'll go ahead and I'll go there, and let's see if I could download this one. That's right, of course, I can't win today. Let me see if I can do it by dragging. There we go. We'll do it by dragging. So what I can do then is I can bring in that image. And we're going to bring in that image by going up to the File menu here, and I'll go to File and then Place Embedded. So it's File, Place Embedded. And I can then go, oh no. I should, if my computer was working, I should be able to browse for that particular file. It should let me pick it. But of course, this is not working that way. So we'll have to work around it. Let's see if I can drag it in. There we go. So I'm just going to, using drag and drop. Such is life. I need to make this big enough If I want it to stay, it's going to stay in proportion as I go to move it. If I want it out of proportion, I can hold down the Shift key and have more flexibility. I just want this to take up the whole size of my existing file. I'm going to go ahead and click this little check mark when I'm done. That means commit to the size. It sharpens up a bit. It's not the highest quality image here. But now I could take that layer with the image on it, and I can change the blending mode on it. So I'll change the blending mode first to multiply. And you'll see that now this looks like it was printed on a piece of paper and was crinkled up. If I switch from blending mode multiply to blending mode screen, it looks awful. If I switch from that to blending mode overlay, I kind of get somewhere in the middle of the two. So I have to decide which one of these looks the best and then commit to it. Now, if I didn't like this particular one, like I said, the texture was a little bit too much, I might bring in a different one. And let's see. Let me go back here and pick one. It's a little more subtle. Something like this sometimes is good when it has darker edges around it. So I'm going to use that one for right now. Actually, you know what? Let me go to the actual website here. Of course I can't find anything. We'll go ahead and drag it. And then we'll drag that one in here. There we go. I would recommend not doing the drag and drop thing because I'd rather have higher quality. All right, so I'll bring it in about like that. And it's not even the right proportions here, so let me... That's the one nice thing about the grunge textures is you don't always have to keep them in proportion because you can't really tell what they are anyway. So that's where holding down Shift can help you. So there it is. Now when I go in and I change the blending mode on this, let me commit to the size here. When I change the blending mode, let's say to multiply or to overlay, we're getting a darkening. It's almost a vignette effect on it. So maybe it's multiply. But in this case, it's just too dark. It's too much. I can come in here, and right next to where it says multiply, there's an opacity slider, and it's at 100%. If I change this down, it'll control how much of the grunge is applied. So maybe I only want a little bit around the edges, or I want a little bit of scratch to it. And I can do it that way. So this is applying a grunge texture to a background. Spend some time actually searching for them. I have on my flash drive, which of course I can't access, I have a whole folder of grunge textures that I've saved over time. So if I go into my resources folder, I have a folder called grunge textures. And these are all high-resolution grunge textures that I've saved to go back and work with. You know, some of them are based on paper, some of them are based on concrete, some of them have other, bizarre background textures. There's concrete. And so I've just kind of collected and saved these over time. They're all free to use or Creative Commons licensed. And so I can use any one of those on these images, and we could see what would happen. So I could put this one on, for example. And let's see here. Let's Shift. It's kind of similar. It's probably a little bit higher quality, like that. And once again, I can go through my various modes here. There's multiply. It's a little bit darker on the edges, but you guys get the idea. Okay? So I want you to play around with this on the grunge texture. So that's part 6. When you're done, remember you're always going to have an original and a modified as you go through. So if you're using the same original all the way through, then you'll have fewer originals. If you need more originals, that's okay. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 images that you're going to be posting. You'll post it the same way you did last class. And then when you're done, you can go ahead and start working on your assignment. Remember, we have that assignment due next Wednesday. Not this Wednesday, but the week after. We do not have class next Monday because it's President's Weekend. So we'll have Wednesday, and then the assignment will be due the following Wednesday in a week. Does that make sense, everybody? Yeah. All right, I'll let you guys get started. I do, by the way, apologize that my computer was acting up all day.